January 5th, that would be today, Minnesota law enforcement agencies will receive training on roadside tests to determine if someone is under the influence of drugs while driving. The training is part of a pilot project authorized by the state legislature when adult use cannabis was legalized this past summer. Shout out to you, Dr. Mark. That also said marijuana, recreational marijuana, and like, here's shameless plug for Style Guide and how to properly use terminology. We don't have to repeat their terrible talking points. So you just be you, boo. Drug recognition evaluators will be trained. Drug recognition evaluators will be trained with fluid instrument, oral fluid instrument. It's kind of like the word moist, which detects the presence of cannabis and other drugs in a driver. I'm feeling frisky. During the pilot program, results gathered from the tests won't be admissible in court during the pilot program. The goal is to obtain legislative approval in 2025 to use the roadside tool in the field to enforce arrests for drug-impaired drivers. Northern News Now did check with the Duluth Police, who said that the department has 2 officers who are trained as drug recognition evaluators, DREs, also in some places known as drug recognition experts. One of those officers will be sent to the Twin Cities to receive training on the tool as part of the pilot program. So basically, they'll have one officer trained on this particular tool. Now, short article, because I wanted to also just bring in a little bit of context, because there is experience. From the National Institute of Justice in 2021, there was an article on field sobriety tests and THC levels as an unreliable indicator in marijuana intoxication. RTI concluded that for their dosing study, THC levels in biofluid were not reliable indicators of marijuana intoxication. Now, I can also probably take issue with the word intoxication from late Latin. Toxicus means poisoned, and cannabis is not a poison. However, what we are worried about is whatever it is you might have taken on the road, whether it's Ambien or cannabis or texting while driving or too sleepy to be on the road. Many of these study participants that had oral fluid swabs, most of these study participants had significantly decreased cognitive and psychomotor functioning, even when their blood, urine, and fluid containing low levels of THC. They also observed standardized field sobriety tests commonly used to detect driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol were not effective in detecting cannabis, especially intoxication. Because what we're really talking about here is not the presence of it in your system. It is affecting the way you drive on the road. Because if you are a patient with a medical condition, you're going to do better if you have MS, if you take your medicine, versus if you don't, your symptoms are going to be worse. And so a per se limit in your system in no way, shape, or form indicates your ability to drive with cannabis the way a tried and true tested, the BAC, blood alcohol content for alcohol exists. Other fun fact, Michigan State Police Forensic Science Division has halted all THC toxicology testing due to technical issues where samples containing cannabidiol, known as CBD, may be converted to THC during the testing process, leading to potentially inaccurate results. I think that's another issue of the scientists not knowing as much what they're talking about. But according to George Law, nearly 1/3 of all tests led to erroneous results. So in 11 out of 74 occasions, the test found that the person who showed impaired by THC with a swab, when they were also tested, it was not found in their blood. One last thing that I will point out, back to methods of ingestion. If you look at the chart of detectable amounts of THC in these swabs, it is wildly different. If you smoke it, you have a huge spike. If you eat it, it's almost undetectable. And yet if you eat it, it's way more psychoactive. I'm personally, as a mom on the road, way more concerned about people that eat too many brownies than smoke too many joints. So there's just no correlation, and we can't have legal causation as a result of any of these tests, in my opinion. I am Dale Scott Jones with Oak University, closing out today's High at 9 news.
Man, Dale, I'm telling you, I think cannabis stops road rage. I really do.
The challenge is the science still isn't in. The difference between ingestation versus intoxication. And the science still isn't there. And so we still have this problem. But we're going to have a lot of people getting DUIs who probably don't deserve it. And the science is... I mean, we had the California Department of Transportation talking about this at a CCIA event back in 2017. We're now in 2024. The science still isn't in. There's something to be solved here, but if they get ahead of that without backing it with real solid science, because taking something doesn't mean that you are impaired, right? Ingestation and impairment are two very different things. And so I'm worried that they're getting a little ahead of themselves, well-intended, but over their skis, and that a lot of people are going to get DUIs who don't deserve them.
And that's why we need to not allow per se driving limits be introduced into law. Per se meaning if it's in your system, you're guilty, because that's just simply not a measurement of a crime. It's how you behave. And I would go back to arguing there are a lot of drugs that we commonly consume and not drugs like sleep that we didn't consume that affect our driving. And I want to reinforce the answer is not a quick, easy tab test like the BAC. That works. It genuinely is correlated to performance. The blood alcohol tests that are roadside are generally accurate. They want that easy, quick test. Law enforcement, whoever wants that quick test for marijuana intoxication. It does not exist, like you said, in the science. But what does exist is training for law enforcement experts to recognize when you're driving like shit and charge you with that, regardless of the reason why. Stop looking for a swab in the mouth. And you know what I think it's going to be is electronics. Bring an iPad and have a test on how fast you can react and respond to that test. And then it's not the officer deciding whether or not you look you're drunk. It's a test that it is qualitative.
Then I still wonder.
I'm going to go back and forth on the game of Wordle with you. See how high they are.
While walking backwards with their eyes closed, touching their nose. In a straight line. Ooh, Steve, did you do that?
The reason why the blood alcohol content is such a good measure for impairment is because they made a correlation between impairment and blood alcohol content. And that took a huge study of a statistically significant swath of the population that uses it, that have pre-existing conditions, that some are overweight, some are underweight, some are younger, some are older. So in order to basically extrapolate that onto a population, you have to understand the variation within that population, or else it's not statistically significant.
But we also don't have like a medicinal endo-alcohol system. Like endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids are entirely different than alcohol.
I have one for Pinot Noir. I have my own little internal system just for Russian River AVA Pinot. It has been discovered within my system, and I believe ready to do Sideways 2.0. I have a Pinot Noir system.
Oh, boy.
I'm glad you said noir. Cheers.
White Russian River.
Oh, boy.
I like that.